Hey monsters! Thanks for tuning in to Murder News, the true crime cult for the latest breaking news, murdery memes, TV reviews, podcast recommendations, and all things spooky. If you like baby goats and talking about true crime, you may be interested in joining our cult. I'm Television's Aurora Katie.
And I'm one of your online murder friends, Angelina. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and this is the Week in True Crime.
Murder News.
We want to start off today by addressing the murder of George Floyd. It's hard to express just how upsetting this is without being sensational or exploitative, but it's important to speak out against this injustice. 4 police officers in Minnesota killed George while arresting him. Footage shows George being forcibly pulled from his car and an officer pinning him down to the ground by his neck. You can hear George cry for help that he couldn't breathe in the video. The officers who killed George have all been fired from their jobs, but charges have not been filed against them. Protestors in Minneapolis have been demanding that murder charges are brought against the officers. If you're wondering what more you can do, you can call District Attorney Mike Freeman at the number below to demand justice for George. We're also including resources below for donating to George's GoFundMe memorial and ways to help educate yourself, your family, and your children on stopping racism.
On Sunday, Ethan Hunsaker allegedly murdered a Tinder date he met just hours before. Ashlyn Black met up with Ethan after meeting online, and the two had a date at a local bar in Layton, Utah. According to Ethan, the two met up around 9 p.m. and went back to his house. He said the two of them were intimate before falling asleep together on the floor. He woke up hours later and attempted to strangle Ashlyn. Ashlyn fought for her life, but Ethan got a knife from the kitchen and stabbed her repeatedly. Ethan called the police to report himself and confessed to Ashlyn's murder, stating he had been struggling with thoughts of suicide and murder. There have been too many stories about Tinder date murders lately, so please be careful.
We're happy to report some good news for you this week, as Madison Bell, a missing teenager from Greenfield, Ohio, was found alive and well. Madison was reported missing on May 17th when her car was discovered in the parking lot of a church with her cell phone and keys still inside. A nationwide search began to find Madison, as her family feared for the worst. Madison left home of her own free will to start a new life, and police found her with a man she met on the internet whom they thought might be involved in what they feared was a kidnapping. Madison said she was not aware that the police were looking for her and didn't think there was an issue with her leaving since she was legally an adult.
I definitely feel like there's a bit more to that story.
Yeah, I think there's maybe some tension there in that family that's not addressed.
Yeah, I'm curious because I feel like, even when I was 18 and not living with my parents anymore, I feel like if I would have left my phone and abandoned my car and keys in a parking lot, I would expect them to call the police.
Yeah, that is a little suspicious no matter how you spin it.
Yeah, I'm really glad everything was okay though.
Yeah.
Each week, we'll try to introduce you to a podcast that might be new for you. This week's favorite podcast is Pros and Cons. Let's take a look. We are so excited to have Bethany Jones with us from this week's favorite podcast, Pros and Cons. Pros and Cons is hosted by veteran true crime television producers Bethany Jones and Adriana Padilla for the ultimate insider look into the world of true crime with insight from pros and cons that actually live the cases. Bethany, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I am doing so well.
Good. And you're in Los Angeles, is that correct?
I am. I'm in sunny Los Angeles. It's a sunny place for shady people, Southern California.
Great. That should definitely be LA's tagline.
It should.
So Bethany, how is the quarantine in Los Angeles? Like, what state are you in right now?
So we've gone through different phases. It's almost, like a relationship and you've broken up and you have the different varying steps. And at first there was like panic and pandemonium and fear. And that kind of undulated in waves for about 2 to 3 weeks because the shutdown for us happened gradually. It was like, first it was bars and wineries, and then it was the restaurants. And so it wasn't this interruptive stop. It kind of rolled out slowly.
Oh, interesting.
And then it got really quiet and peaceful, very unlike the city, you know. I kept saying to my brother, who I'm quarantined with, I said, am I just noticing the birds for the first time, or have there always been this amount of birds? And now you can kind of sense this restlessness. People are kind of wanting something new. They want to kind of get back to whatever their sense of normalcy is. So the beaches have just opened up, trails have just opened up. So, you know, gradually California is kind of emerging from its quarantine shell, and we'll see how it goes over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I've been so impressed. I feel like LA and California in general had a pretty low level of infection compared to some other large cities. And I think that's because y'all took it seriously so quickly. Like everybody started the lockdown so quickly. Like you mentioned, it was sort of like a slow rollout, but everybody was actually staying inside, which is impressive to me because I'm in Montreal right now. The weather is finally like to a place where people want to go outside. Like we just went from actual winter, like very cold, to like 3 days later, now it's summer and almost 80 degrees. And everybody is just
Yes.
stir crazy, like you were saying, and getting outside, but we don't have a beach.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful city. So I'm sure people want to go to, you know, Old Town Montreal or out to Lake Tremblant, or they want to, you know, be going to the bistros and brasseries and enjoying that. It's such a beautiful city. And especially after kind of your winter hibernation, you want to shed that skin and get out there. So I can appreciate that.
Boy, do we want to get outside. And
Yeah.
Bethany, I wanted to talk for a bit about what is your true crime origin? How did you get into true crime originally?
So, as a child, so I was raised in England and France, and I always loved reading the cases. You know, there were some big cases in the UK when I was a kid. There was, you know, the Jamie Bulger case. Then I moved to the States. I moved the year that O.J. Simpson was on trial.
Oh, wow.
And I was just fascinated, drawn to it. In the UK, there were a couple other big cases, Sarah Payne and Holly and Jessica, pretty landmark cases, watershed cases that changed the law and kind of changed Britain's interaction with, you know, especially child-related crimes. So
Right.
just had this interest, had this fascination. I went to high school in Los Angeles, and then I went to university in Wales, to the University of Wales.
Wow.
And while I was studying there, I thought I wanted to write for Vogue or Vanity Fair, and I wanted to do these human interest pieces similar to Dominic Dunn, you know, the revered journalist and author. And I ended up being offered a position on Prison Break, which is a scripted show for 20th Century Fox. And I was on the first iteration of it, not the current one, which kind of ages me, but there you go. I age like wine.
Indeed.
Indeed. And right after I'd worked on Prison Break, you know, I had done research for them, and I had done pretty dark research. I'd looked into human rights violations in Latin American prisons. I'd looked into diseases, conditions in US prisons. I looked into all these varying factors. And then the writer's strike and the recession happened just back to back. And, you know, Hollywood's already a very fickle town, and it's already very difficult to break in. And people were just scrambling, looking for work, hungry for work. You know, people who have been higher on the totem pole were taking jobs and positions that they'd kind of outgrown, which pushed a lot of the incomers and newcomers a little further away. Well, at that time, you know, Hollywood kind of, it always pivots. It always finds its new look, regardless of the environment we're in. You know, it's doing the same now in quarantine.
Right.
And a friend of mine called and said, hey, I'm working on this documentary, and I can offer you a 6-week gig. And I was like, oh my God, yes, sign me up. I didn't even
I'll
ask
take it.
anything. And I was like, I'm going to be with David Attenborough and the Penguins. Like, I had this vision. It was going to be like BBC Wildlife or something. And then I called her and I said, okay, so what show am I producing? And she said, Killer Kids for A&E. And I was like, what? Why do you think I'd be good at this? And she said, you're a really good listener. And so I came to work and expected 6 weeks of work and to move on to something else. And here I am 7 years later. So it's kind of branded me now. You know, I don't know if the thug life chose me or if I chose the thug life or
Right.
what, but it was meant to be 6 weeks and it's just continued and I've done everything and anything. So.
And so you found yourself already working in true crime and working specifically on true crime television shows. What inspired you to start your podcast?
Well, we would go to dinners or drinks, or we would be part of other true crime communities, and we found that people had these burning questions about how we actually produce a true crime documentary series. Like, how do we get that content for Discovery ID, A&E, CNN, Oxygen? You know, how do we put out that content that you consume? And so we also had these funny stories and these quirky stories about producing, you know, as any producer does, you know, trying to get something made. And we thought, let's just start this. Let's start and either tell stories that aren't being told or give people a glimpse into what it's like to make these shows that you all love so much. And so that was it. And it's been very creatively rewarding.
Well, from listening to your podcast, I know that you're known as the inmate whisperer. How did you get that nickname?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and it's a funny story. So Adriana and I were working on a CNN series together. It was the first show we'd done together. Back when I was actually working on Killer Kids is when Adriana and I began our friendship. She was working on a show across the street, and we would sometimes meet for a happy hour. And we just got on, you know, like gasoline and fire. So when we got to work together, it was I know, terrible analogy, but
It's a fantastic analogy.
we were just so thrilled. I was so thrilled to work with her for the first time. And someone came in and said, let's try and do an episode on a domestic terrorist. So I was like, okay. So I wrote to, who did I write to? I wrote to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. I wrote to Eric Robert Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber. And then we were also doing a piece on an Iranian arms dealer, so kind of separate and apart. So I got a response from Ted Kaczynski. I've still got the letter. I got a response from Eric Robert Rudolph. And then they're like, no, we don't want to do like a domestic terrorist case. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, for our Iranian arms dealer, we needed to track down someone, and it was this confidential informant. And I found him. Like, I tracked him down. Everyone had said he'd be harder to find than Jesus Christ, and I found him. And I wrote to him, and by way of Saddam Hussein's weapon supplier. So there I was with my little like Ted Kaczynski letter, my Saddam Hussein letter, Saddam Hussein's weapon supplier letter, and also with Eric Robert Rudolph. And someone said, wow, aren't you just a little inmate whisperer? And I thought, I kind of am. Like, they gravitate to me for some reason. So on Killer Kids, they gravitated towards me on every show I do. And, you know, part of the reason I wanted to kind of take ownership of that name, of that nickname, is because it could have become really sensationalized and it could have become part of like this murderabilia kind of feeling. And I didn't want that because I do believe in compassion. I do believe in restorative justice and second chances. And, you know, I thought, well, if I'm going to be labeled this, and if people, you know, Mary Claire profiled me, the magazine, I thought I want to put it out in a way that's tasteful and appealing and appetizing, not in a way that it's just like, hey, come look at my, weird cachet of serial killer letters. Like, no, that's not me. So.
And I'm
yeah.
sure that that's part of the reason why that you got responses from them, is that going into that with that empathy and being respectful, whereas other people might just see them as either these vicious killers, which, like, you know, they are, or like that gross, like, worship thing that unfortunately happens with some very off-brand true crime fanatics, where it's like, like this letter, like, I just love Ted Kaczynski, which I don't understand. So I think you sort of like met, and like you met in the middle, like you were able to like find a place where like you could respect the situation that they were in, like it sounds like.
It is. And also, I think something that people should remember, yes, these people crossed the threshold of the law. Some of them did it ideologically. Ted and Eric did it ideologically, right? That's what motivated them.
Right.
You know, I just actually had a call with law enforcement just before I hopped on here. And I said, hey, what are the kinds of stories you want to be told? What do you want to see on Oxygen? What do you see on Discovery ID? And we both kind of said, like, anyone can kill anyone, right? You just put the right ingredients into the pot and let it boil.
Right.
And that's the same for you. It's the same for me. It's the same for, you know, it just depends on what those ingredients are. And that's per person. That's individual. So murder's never really fascinated me. Sorry. Let me rephrase that. Murder is not the most fascinating crime psychologically. Like espionage, white collar crime, that's really fascinating. Like, oh my God, like it's wildly complicated. Or like art heists, like you can't sell that art. You can't put it up in your house. So why do you want it? What's going on? So, you know, she and I were just kind of talking about that. And then I thought, oh God, I probably shouldn't have said to like a law enforcement agent, like, I can kill someone. Like, it's definitely part of my components. So, oh God, I better send an email to clarify that. But yeah, like if you just approach someone like they're a human and like, you know, you're like, there's someone's child, there's someone's brother, there's someone's son, there's someone's friend. And, you know, just, the people who I've interviewed, who I got world exclusives with, I went back and I asked them all, hey, why did you finally respond to me? Or why did you choose to do my show? And all of them have said, like, you treated me like a human. So I think that really, and the same goes to the victims. Like, they don't want to be overly, like, sensationalized either. I think they just really want to be, like, humanized. They don't, like, a lot of them don't want to be put on a pedestal or
like treated too gently. I think people have a tendency to do that too, and sort of like, oh, you're just like a little victim over there. And you don't want that if you've been victimized. Like, you want to kind of feel like life can go back to normal and that you can have regular conversations with people that aren't just about what happened to you.
You don't want it to brand you necessarily. So.
Right. Well, Bethany, one of the things I love about your podcast is that you have both pros and cons on your show.
Yes.
And there's been some really interesting guests on your show. You had Justin Brooks of the Innocence Project. You had Paul Haynes, who worked with Michelle McNamara and I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Who would be a dream guest for you to have on your show?
You know, I think I would really like to have my friend on. I won't say their name, but they have a pretty high profile case and they served 19 years. And now their case has been used to change law because of the injustices by the justice system against this individual. And I would love to have that conversation because you see it time and time again, or you get stunned with, you know, a 13-year-old got life without parole, or to me, the fragility of being a victim, which this person was, and then crossing over and becoming a perpetrator because of self-defense, that line is just so thin, so fragile, so vulnerable. And I just think that would be a really, really fascinating story to tell. I really like getting into that and kind of exploring my own feelings with that and those conflicting feelings. And I would love to have on, I think, honestly, it sounds really funny. One of our DPs is friends with the guy who did Tiger King.
Right.
And I really want to have him on just because I want to be like, almost like have a drinking session. Like, that sounds terrible. But to talk about the weird, quirky people we've had to deal with throughout our careers and be like, okay, you tell us about your journey on Tiger King. We're going to tell you about, being stuck out in Texas and this old lady's house and whatever. So
yeah, that's so true. And I think that being in like in Hollywood, like you were saying earlier before, it does kind of feel like this weird faux universe that I think might be relatable. Like, I wasn't as shocked by Tiger King as I think some people are, because my husband's in film. Like, I am sometimes on these sets with him and meeting all sorts of like quirky celebrity types and all these different diva personalities and stuff that tend to happen on film sets. And it's kind of like, well, maybe that show was a little wild, but I've seen crazier.
To me, I think what I loved is there isn't anyone truly redeemable. Like, I don't want to say it like that, but there isn't. Everyone's manipulative in some way. Everyone's got their demons in some way. There wasn't anyone who you're like you can root for, know? And so it's just,
it's
interesting.
It was a wild ride for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Bethany, it's been such a pleasure having you here today. Can you please let our viewers know where they can find Pros and Cons and your other projects on social media?
Absolutely. So you can follow us at the Pros and Cons podcast on both Instagram and Facebook. And we have a private Facebook group for those of you who want true crime all the time without your friends and family knowing. And we encourage you guys to post memes and to post stories. And, we interact with you in there. We are at the Pros and Cons show on Twitter. And, we have shows coming up on Oxygen. I just this year produced Twisted Sisters and Twisted Love for Discovery ID. So I think that's on their, I believe that's on their streaming platform right now during quarantine. So you can tell them to go there.
I will be checking that out tonight. So I'll let you all know how it is.
Yes. I'll tell you specifically which episodes I produced and how they all went. So
that's so exciting. Well, Bethany, it's been so much fun having you here. You have to come back and talk more about your TV projects too in the future, because it's been such a pleasure.
I absolutely will. Thank you so much for having me, and stay safe, stay healthy, and don't commit crimes.
Yes, that's the slogan we can all live by.
Yes, that's a good one.
This week, we're watching Trial by Media on Netflix. The show is a blast from the past, highlighting the most dramatic cases of all time, most of which took place in the 90s. The 90s was a time when everything was suddenly on television, from people's personal lives displayed on reality TV to criminal trials on court TV. So there's some great clips from some very over-the-top theatrical trials where everyone in court was an actor and even your average neighbor had an opinion on what the outcome should be. Trial by Media features some familiar cases like the Jenny Jones talk show murder and the NYC subway vigilante that are believed to have had their outcome affected by extensive media coverage. Check it out now on Netflix and let us know what you think in the comments below. I'll tell you what I think. What a roller coaster ride. Yes. I remember most of these cases, but it's illuminating to revisit them now through the lens of the 90s. I mean, what were these people thinking?
It's funny. I don't remember really hearing about, I saw the first 3 episodes. I haven't seen the entire series yet, but somehow I didn't hear about the Jenny Jones murder, and Jenny Jones wasn't necessarily my favorite show, but I used to watch a lot of trashy talk show sorts of things in the 90s, and Nikki Lake and all of them, and I can't believe I didn't hear about it.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it, but I don't remember hearing, I was obviously really young when that happened, so I don't remember hearing too in depth about it. And looking at it now, I'm just like, it's very obvious, like that case was like heavily homophobic, and like it's strange to be like, oh, well, obviously if you put someone on TV and then like humiliate them, like they'll murder somebody. But like now we know that's clearly not true, because so many people are humiliated on TV every day. And
you know, they used a really interesting term in that episode. They used ambush media, which is such the perfect way to describe that sort of sensationalistic TV that they were doing then.
Right.
And I don't know if those shows are still on now. I don't have cable at home. I mean,
really,
they're
sure not as popular.
I mean, good. Like it's terrible. Like that show was a specific case of homophobia, certainly as far as that man took it. But the idea of like bringing somebody on TV and like throwing any drama on them, it's just like, it's so over the top. I can't believe that was a thing. I can't believe I watched it. I say as I watch Vanderpump Rules.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, these are, that's the thing. I feel like these things are so much more commonplace now, watching weirdo TV shows and just seeing inside everyone's lives. And I don't know, people aren't getting murdered at the rate that they might have thought. But I also want to note, for the second episode, there's it's about the NYC subway vigilante. I read a really cool book that examines that really changed my outlook on like vigilantes in general, and Batman especially. But it's called I Wear the Black Hat, Grappling with Villains, Real and Imagined. That's by Chuck Klosterman. He does an interesting comparison of the subway vigilante with Batman, and it just like, it makes me hate Batman. So it's very fascinating.
And I can see why it's a bad idea. Like when you're watching like comic book movies and stuff as a kid, it seems like they're the hero within watching this like racist man just go out and kill black men on the subway. It's like, okay. I mean, not
you can't take the law into your own hands. No.
It's like, I mean, apparently, I don't know. It's terrible. Like I hate what we're living in right now. It seemed very timely watching that episode, unfortunately, but I feel like it's always timely because we just lived in this.
Oh yeah, it's been going on all along. But yeah, that's just the first time that we started seeing stuff about that on TV, I guess. So
Well, great show, great recommendation. You brought it to my attention. Thank you. I loved it.
We love reading your comments, and we want to thank What's Her Deal for mentioning that she's happy incels are being classified as terrorists, because they totally are. She also mentioned that she didn't know California was trying to change their laws on ancestry DNA stuff.
Thanks to Fanny D for also mentioning that she's glad they're finally calling incels terrorist attacks and not lone wolf attacks.
Thanks so much for tuning into This Week in True Crime with Murder Murder News. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below, give us a thumbs up, and tell all of your true crime friends.
If you need more of a true crime fix, join our commune at MurderMurder.news for our Monster Book Club and Cold Case Solving groups. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. See you next week.